We all know that at the heart of the festival of Chanukah is a tremendous inner turmoil, a debate, a divide that literally threatened to split the Jewish people into two, between the Hasmoneans and the Hellenists, those who saw themselves as true to everything that Torah life was about, and those who became so acculturized, so assimilated, that they became indistinguishable in their lifestyle and identity from the Greeks and the Greek culture around them. This is the challenge of our time as well. At what point does integration, an integrated life, become a culturalized and assimilated one, where the very survival and future of Jewish destiny is compromised? We know, unfortunately today, so many Jews, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, which have become so culturalized and assimilated that they're on their way outside of the Jewish people, no longer part and affiliated, known as the unaffiliated Jews, to the Jewish community and the Jewish people themselves. At what point are we no longer living a lifestyle which is expressing true Torah values and Jewish values, and really stepping out into a world around us that is foreign to what Judaism is all about? This session, this symposium with such wonderful and leading thinkers and speakers from Israel and around the world is dedicated to this critical question in the spirit of Chanukah and how we face it today. We dedicate the symposium, as we have done at Mizrahi with all of our programming this week, Le'ilui Nishmat, to the memory and the life and legacy of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who was so dear to us at Mizrahi and to so many millions around the world. Le'ilui Nishmat, Harav Yaakov Tzvi, Ben David Aryeh Zatzal, that all the learning should be Le'inui Nishmato, and that his towering example should continue to inspire, to guide us morally and spiritually. And what an example he was of getting this balance right between integrating timeless Torah values with the timeless challenges of the modern era. And in fact, Chazal, the sages themselves, speak about this already at the time of the Greeks. What is our attitude to Chokhmah Yevani, to Greek wisdom? And regarding Greek wisdom, we have different views. There's a particular source in Masechet, in the Yerushalmi, Masechet Peah, which speaks about Greek wisdom as a tachshit. It's an adornment and a jewel. It brings something so beautiful to who we are as people and as Jews. On the other extreme, though, we find at the end of Masechet Sotah, we Chazal say, Arur Adam sheyelamed libno chokhmah yavanit. Cursed is a person who teaches their children Greek wisdom. It's the antithesis of what Jewish wisdom is all about. So what is it? Is it an adornment, a jewel, or is it something which is the antithesis of everything about Jewish education and values? Of course, it depends what. There seems to be elements, kernels of wisdom and of culture in Greek wisdom and in our modern lives today that we can take to enhance Torah, for Torah to be a Torat Chaim, so relevant and inspiring and playing such a powerful role in society itself, a Torah which embraces and engages with life. But on the other hand, there is something about modern culture which is so often foreign to Torah and actually threatens the very existence and survival of Jewish identity and destiny. That is what this session is all about. And join us in the journey over the next hour as we speak to many leading thinkers about how we together struggle and try and find the balance between the timeless values of Torah and the timeless challenges of our modern and postmodern era. Chief Rabbi Dr. Warren Goldstein has been the Chief Rabbi of the South African community for 17 years. He holds a doctorate in law and has brought the authentic voice of Torah, speaking truth to power in confronting many of the challenges of modern life in general and the South African unique challenges in particular. Chief Rabbi Goldstein, in this tremendous challenge, going back not only to Chanukah, between the Mityavnim and the Hellenists and the Chashmonaim, the loyalty to timeless Torah values, the pure olive oil, as opposed to modern values. How do we get this balance right? How do we do it? The loyalty between being absolutely committed to our timeless Torah values, yet at the same time being open to the modern world, taking what there is to take from it, and really knowing that we're getting the balance right as Torah Jews who are, living relevantly in the modern world, taking all the good from the world, impacting in the modern world. How do we get the balance right? That's my question to you.
So thank you so much. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be part of such a distinguished panel. And well done to you, Rabbi Perez, for your leadership of the Mizrahi movement, but also in particular this gathering, and which is being done in honor of Chief Rabbi Lord Sachs, which who is such an icon in our world for all of the issues that you've placed on the agenda in this discussion. And to me, what it actually boils down to, let me say that differently. To me, what this comes down to is a statement that I read a number of years ago, which made a big impact on me. And it was actually articulated by one of the great rabbis in America in the 20th century, Rabbi Mordechai Pinchas Teitz of Elizabeth, New Jersey. And it's a beautiful book written by his daughter, Rivka Blau, about him. And he used to say this: the Torah speaks in the language of tomorrow. And that what he meant by that is that Hashem gave us the Torah for all times and all places, all civilizations, all cultures, and it has within it wisdom that sometimes we cannot even appreciate today because its wisdom hasn't yet been uncovered. So it speaks in the language of tomorrow. It has a vision and an impact. And to me, the starting point of our discussion has to be this: the Torah has within it enormous resources, Hashem's wisdom, to be able to make us into better people and allow us to make a contribution to making a better world. So the focus needs to be, where can we find within the wisdom of the Torah to help us? And that sort of guided me in my own life, in the sense that the PhD which I wrote was a PhD looking at the issue of Western constitutional law and human rights, but from a Torah law perspective. And the launch pad for it was really to say the Torah is a legal system in its heart and soul, and it gave a way of looking at the world, of how law can impact and change society. Now let's understand what the Torah has to teach the world. And so my PhD was really about looking at the issues of political power, poverty alleviation, women's rights, the rights of how to run a criminal justice system, those four areas, taking the principles of Torah law and looking how that could impact on society. So the start point is there, and then to work our way and say, how can that make us into better people, and how can that make our world into a better place? And that's kind of what's guided me. That my PhD thesis was one example of it. But it's kind of guided me in my work as chief rabbi in South Africa when confronting issues such as President Jacob Zuma, who was so blatantly corrupt, and then being able to challenge him and saying, well, Torah law guides us on the primacy of ethics and values, and the importance of speaking out for truth, and the importance of being a Kiddush Hashem. So at a time when this was the biggest moral issue facing the country, I felt that as a Torah leader, I couldn't remain silent in the face of that, even though there was a lot of communal pressure pushing in the other direction. But I felt that it was so important to do that. And in each step of the way, what has guided me has been saying, well, what does Torah as a source of wisdom have to show and to guide our world? And because it's all there. The famous midrash of looking into the Torah and creating the world, it is the blueprint of all of existence. So that's where we're going to draw, to draw our wisdom from.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. Not only in terms of your towering leadership of the South African Jewish community and the Shabbat project and so many things which have impacted not only within the precincts of the borders of South Africa, far beyond, but also this fascinating what you've highlighted here, that your very doctorate was in an area of the Torah as a legal system, as a system of legality and justice, and how it relates to all of the issues facing the modern world. And the legal systems of today. That's absolutely fascinating. Perhaps just to draw on one of the things that you said is that the world of politics and Torah. A Torah leader who had to, I was in South Africa at the time, and I know that the leadership positions that you took are incredibly bold and speaking truth to power. This session we also dedicated, of course, to the late, it's even hard to say, the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who also was such a lahavdil ben chaim l'chaim, such a voice of truth to power and a moral voice. And that, in the South African context, that's an unbelievable achievement. Could you perhaps just dwell on that for a moment? The bringing a Torah voice to the world of politics, diplomacy, statesmanship. How were you able for you to sort of bring that together? And it must have been a very big challenge, an enormous challenge for any leader in terms of bringing together the Torah values in the modern world.
Yeah, so I think that, again, for me, this idea of Torah as a blueprint, and then you keep on checking back with the blueprint. And let me give you an example in the context, say, of Israel and Zionism, and speaking out for the cause of the justice of the state of Israel, which is something that I've had to do in South Africa. When you have the ANC, the ruling power, the ruling party, and the government coming out with a stridently anti-Israel position and making the accusation that Israel is an apartheid state. So I've spent a lot of time over these years as chief rabbi defending the reputation of the state of Israel and defending against the apartheid accusation, which I have set out to prove through articles and through speeches which I've given is a lie. It's a defamation of the Jewish state, and therefore an insult to the Jewish people, but an insult to the victims of the real apartheid as well, because if everything is apartheid, nothing is. But the reason that I've got into that space, because a person could say, well, how come as chief rabbi that is an area that I've been involved in over the years, is again part of this blueprint, because the blueprint of the Torah says that when the reputation of Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, is under attack, that is an assault on the future of the Jewish people, both from a point of view of physical threat as well as spiritual threat. What I mean by both is that Chazal have taught us that when there is Ava in the world, when there's hatred towards the Jewish people in the world, that is a pikuach nefesh issue. It's a direct threat to our physical security. And this I think is an important point to understand, which I think that now in recent years, the government of the state of Israel has grasped fully the strategic threat of the political assault on the state of Israel. In the early years of the state, the position was, look, we must just make the state as strong militarily as it can be, and whatever the nations of the world will think about the state of Israel, that's their problem, that's not our problem. Ben Gurion, famously said, it now doesn't matter what the nations will say, it matters what the Jews will do. And I think that's a crucial error, because we know, and we've seen through the politics of what's happened in the world, is that attacks on the moral and political legitimacy of the state of Israel is actually a physical threat to the security of the state of Israel and a physical threat to the security of Jews all around the world. So we have to defend, and I think to the credit of the Israeli government in recent years, it is understood the nature of that strategic threat and done a lot to defend. So that's one reason. But there I'm giving an example of how, say, Torah can help mold a foreign policy of the state of Israel, which is to say we have to treat an attack on the reputation of Am Yisrael as a strategic threat of pikuach nefesh. It's not just a novelty of politics. What Chazal teach us is that's an issue of pikuach nefesh, that is mamash to save Jewish lives. Then I think there's another spiritual imperative, and that is Kiddush Hashem. Kiddush Hashem is the mitzvah, as we all know, of defending the reputation of Hashem in the world. But what Chazal again teach us is that the reputation of Am Yisrael and the reputation of Hashem are two sides of the same coin. They're one and the same. If the reputation of Am Yisrael is attacked, and we're accused of a crime against humanity, which is what apartheid is, then that is a chilul Hashem. That's a desecration of God's name. That prevents us from fulfilling our mission as an Or LaGoyim, as a light unto the nations. So there becomes a spiritual imperative to defend the reputation of the state of Israel. And so I give this as an example of saying, that if one is formulating a policy of let's say of Israeli government, international diplomacy, and public relations, it is a policy that can be driven by Torah values of protecting human life, protecting lives of Jews all around the world, but also the imperative of Kiddush Hashem. So I'm giving that as another example of where the Torah blueprint has a direct impact on what happens in the world and can guide us on dealing with challenges which are immediate, and we need to look to the Torah as that blueprint for how to carry out even the foreign policy of the government of the State of Israel.
Absolutely fascinating how you've been able to take sort of this the blueprint of the Torah, this Torah perspective, both in terms of your legal background and impacting on the legal system in South Africa and the human rights, and bringing the voice of Torah to that, and then beyond the South African context, within the world of world politics, to be able to bring the voice of Torah into that sphere and define so clearly the element of Pikuach Nefesh, Kiddush Hashem, the Torah guiding us on actually creating a strategic political policy. That's really absolutely fascinating. Perhaps one last question, just to zoom out for a moment now into one, post-modernity. We talk about, I have a book in front of me, in fact, that the late Rabbi Sachs actually edited just before he was chief rabbi, called Orthodoxy Confronts Modernity. This is from 1991, almost 30 years ago. Now there's post-modernity, perhaps the new, flavor of Hityavnut, of Hellenism, of the sort of very broad culture, saying distant from Torah values. How would you bring the voice of Torah? What's the main challenge, and how would you bring this voice of Torah, this blueprint, to the challenges in a postmodern world?
I think it's fascinating the way you put it, talking about a postmodern world, because what I think part of that world, in a certain sense, is also post-ideological, and where I see a lot of where society is at the moment, and let's talk Jewish society globally. The global Jewish world is in a certain sense post-denominational. In that, what is most interesting to people and most pertinent to people is whether something is relevant and compelling, and not who said it and what label it has. And I with direct experience, say, with the Shabbat Project, because the Shabbat Project has managed to cross all of the different divisions within the Jewish world, right from from the right all the way to the completely unaffiliated. Because what we haven't done in the Shabbat Project is gone into the debates of defining terms. What we just said come from this perspective, and it's a passionate belief that Shabbat, when it is embraced in the fullness of the immersive experience that is created by the halakha and by generations of Jews who kept it like that, it actually becomes incredibly relevant and compelling. You see, to me, what we've learned in the Shabbat Project, what I've learned in the Shabbat Project, has been this exquisite irony that if you dilute Shabbat, if you dilute Shabbat and you take it away from what it really is, it actually loses its relevance. Because if you take Shabbat and you just make it something which is like a day off at the end of the week, and it becomes a weekend, so what do you need Shabbat for? It's not relevant. The world has got Sunday. The world has got the concept of a weekend. There's a concept of a Sof Shavua. Everyone knows that. So what do you need Shabbat for? Now, it's true that probably the cycle of the 7-day week, which is a remarkable cycle, that came from I would imagine that must have come from the Torah, because where else did it come from? But now comes the question is, where's the relevance of Shabbat? But on the other hand, if you take Shabbat as a full immersive experience, the way that the Torah sets out and the way that it's brought out in the Torah Sheba'al Peh, what happens then is you have something which is radical and different and exciting and engaging, because now it is 25 hours without cell phones, without screens. It's 25 hours without cars. It becomes a total immersive experience for a family. And what we're finding is that modern people who may even be detached from Judaism are drawn to the concept of Shabbat because it's so compelling, because they're looking for this opportunity to really connect as a family. How do you connect as a family when everyone's on their cell phone? How do you connect as a family when everyone's running out the door to get into their car to drive off to the shops? How do you connect as a family and as a human being if you're struggling with commercialism and having to be at work and having to be at the shops, and it drains the human soul? So actually we have three core relationships: our relationship with God, our relationship with other people and our family, and our relationship with ourselves. Those are the three core relationships. And what happens is during the week, those relationships are depleted. Yeah. Shabbat is the perfect formula to restore those relationships. When last did anyone spend time with themselves? And you know where I've seen this, I've had a remarkable engagement over the years, and he was even there at the beginning of the foundations of the Shabbat project with Professor Dan Ariely, who is one of the leading behavioral psychologists in the world, one of the top academics, Israeli, who's now a professor at Duke University. And what I've learned through my engagement with him, and we've shared this in many public forums, is actually the wisdom that is embedded in Shabbat helps a person to be completely psychologically whole and complete in the full sense of what that means, the richness of health, the all-roundedness of it. And so he's seeing the wisdom of it as an objective academic looking at it. But what he's seeing, and he said this right from the beginning of the journey of the Shabbat project, he said, when you're talking about Shabbat to people, encourage them to engage in the full immersive experience. Don't do it half-heartedly. Don't dilute it, because he says the power is the full experience. And he's saying that as a detached academic. So to me, that's another example where, in a certain sense, the Torah is the blueprint. The world is dislocated. It's trying to find itself. It's lost its moorings, and it's lost its sense of connection of the most precious relationships that we have. What's the answer? The blueprint is the Torah itself and Shabbat. And so what I've found is the engaging then with Jews who may be unaffiliated to Jewish communities and to Judaism. What's relevant to them is what talks to them and talks to all of us is relevance and something compelling and something which can actually enhance the quality of life. And the Torah is the blueprint to do that. So one sidesteps all of the ideological discussions and actually says, here is something which is absolutely awesome, and it has that tremendous power.
Unbelievable how you've connected it to that in a postmodern world, but there's an opportunity. Yes, people have freed themselves from postmodernity, post-ideology. So bring something relevant, compelling on its own terms. And once again, the blueprint of the Torah, not only in the legal sphere in terms of South Africa, human rights, not only in terms of politics and representing Israel and seeing the Kiddush Hashem in that, the Pikuach Nefesh, but also bringing the sense of connections in a place where people so much crave it in the post-ideological world. Thank you so much, Rav Warren, Rabbi Goldstein, the Chief Rabbi. This has been unbelievable, a privilege to thank you so much for your time and for your tremendous insights. And Hashem should continue to give you koach to be such a powerful spiritual and moral voice, not only in the South African context, but for global Jewry. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you, Rabbi Perez. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Dr. Tova Lichtenstein is a doctor of social work, particularly passionate about those less fortunate in society, an accomplished person in her own right, while at the same time being the daughter of Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik and the wife of Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, all committed so passionately about bringing the Torah voice in the most powerful way to the challenges of the modern era. Dr. Lichtenstein, how do we get this balance right of taking our timeless Torah values that we are so deeply committed to, as we have been for thousands of years, and ensure that they are relevant to the modern era, that we take all the positives of modernity and the world at large has to offer us? How do we do that? How do we get this integration right, that we know that we are being loyal to our Torah values while at the same time being open to society around us and taking all the good that modern living has to give us?
That's a very large question, and I would like to sort of focus on the things that I think are important. First of all, your question that you ask about all the good. Do we really need all? There is knowledge out there, and there's lots of knowledge out there, but I think man is limited. Man cannot take all. He can't take all in any manner of speaking. I think the issue is not of knowledge. Knowledge is a wonderful thing, and knowledge enriches our lives. I think the issue is an issue of values. What are the Torah values we have? What is the knowledge that is out there that will enrich our Torah values? And in light of this, and not in light, but because of this enrichment, we will be able to contribute to the world, to Tikkun Olam, which is a major Jewish value, in terms of our values and not in the values of the modern world. I have a great problem with the modern world. The modern world is not traditional. The modern world, it turns its back on tradition. The modern world gave birth to the postmodern world. The postmodern world, which we live in, not in the modern world, is one which is relative. It's one which talks about human rights, human responsibilities. The postmodern world has eliminated identity as being of a people. Identity is not us as a people, but is us as a person. The person has become the major focus of the world. God has disappeared. In the modern world, there was a big discussion about God. In the postmodern world, God isn't even an issue. And I think the Jew's major task in life is to be an Oved Hashem, a servant of the Lord. And the postmodern man's major task is to be a servant of himself. And so I think there are real differences. You know, we have to pick and choose, as we have to pick and choose throughout life. You go into a department store, you pick and choose what you want, you buy all that's there.
That's fascinating how you've contextualized and explained really that, as you see it, there really is a tremendous rift, or a real difference between the traditional responsibility-based focus of the Torah as being an Oved Hashem and bringing these values into the world of Tikkun Olam as well, and between a modern and, as you've said, postmodern world of giving birth to a world which doesn't even have God, as you say, as part of the conversation, speaks solely about rights and about the person and not about these values and responsibilities. So having said that, how do we navigate that? How do we navigate ensuring that we are, as you've said, we can't take the word all maybe is too much. We can't take all of the good, but how do we navigate? How do we know that we are being a true Eved Hashem and engaging in the world the way we should? That we aren't perhaps we aren't perhaps being too segregationist, where we not engaging and not being mataken enough and not living out those Torah values, but on the other hand, not not being untrue and inauthentic to our Torah values, and perhaps losing those conservative, traditional values in this postmodern society. How do we navigate that?
That's a very difficult question, and I'd be happy to sort of discuss it with you. Yeah, there are no answers, yes or no. There's no clear formula. But I think the first thing that we need to do, one, be very careful of the terms we're using. When you use the word segregate is a postmodern world which is based on oppression. South African segregation in the United States, there was segregation. This was oppression, which was perpetrated. Oppression is probably which was perpetrated by the ruling class on a minority who was different from them because of color, because of race. Jews were segregated in ghettos. so now has become a different kind of word. And so I think we have to think not of segregation and integration, but we have to talk about involvement. And would feel much more comfortable if we use the word involvement and not segregation because of the emotional meanings there is to the word segregation. I do not like to use words that have connotations that don't fit into what we're talking about. That's my first response. My second response is we have Tovah values, but we do have Tovah values. And these Tovah values are in a sense, they're a filter through which we filter the things we see around us. We have an ethical system. We have a system of laws. We have a system of ethics. There is an ethic in the halakha. We look at the world through these eyes, and then we decide what needs to be done, the tikkun olam. But I don't think we can be universal. There is a famous statement that everybody knows that Aniyeh Echa Kodmim, poor take precedence. And I think that the poor meaning the poor spiritually, the poor economically, the poor in terms of the resources that they have, the poor of the Jews take precedence over the poor of the non-Jew, of the outer world. I remember once, many years ago, I was in the United States. I was living in Israel, and I went to visit my father. And the doorbell rang, and there was a man who said to me with this very sad face, "You know, the whales in the northern Arctic have been because of pollution." I really think that's a problem. I really do think that environmentalism is a problem. But I thought to myself, here I live in Israel, I have wars on our borders, and we have all kinds of problems, and we have poverty, and we have social inequality. I don't think that I should be the one that worries about the whales. There must be people in the world that worry about that. Someone once said to me, when Jews can only worry about climate control, we will be in. So I think you need to have a priority of Aniyeh Echa Kodmim. And I think there's much that needs to be done for the Jewish community. And I don't feel segregationist, and I don't feel isolated. I really feel that the poor of my people should take precedence over the poor of the world. Universalism is a thing if the particular is in good shape. But our particular is not in good shape.
Thank you. That's firstly, thank you for sensitizing me to even the usage of the word segregation. I'll be very mindful of that going forward, and I really appreciate you mentioning that. And of course, focusing less on that, but more on, as you said, involvement and influence. And also the fascinating point of course, as you mentioned, believing in tikkun olam and a broader message. But firstly, beginning with, as your charity begins at home, beginning from within, and then moving to the circles of the particular and the people, and then from within to the broader responsibilities of even the whales. So one final question, Dr. Lichtenstein. Of course, you yourself are a doctor of social work and have had such a tremendous impact both in Bar Ilan University and in society at large in getting involved in so many social issues facing society. At the same time, you grew up, you're the daughter of Rav Soloveitchik, who so many of us see as the guide when it comes to integrating Torah values, the timeless Torah values with the modern world. And of course, being the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva University, a Torah Umada institution, which is a flagship institution of trying to integrate these values. How did growing up in this home and having such a father perhaps influence your life in terms of navigating the fine balance between Torah values in the modern world?
Okay, I would just like to a little bit about the concept of Torah Umada. I know it sits on the shield of Yeshiva University. My grandfather taught there, and my father and my husband. And I must say, I think none of them truly identified with that, because they saw my husband and my father saw knowledge that you got from the Western world, from culture. They saw that as their toolboxes. They were saw as the center of their lives. They were devoted and dedicated to the study of Torah, and Maddah became a toolbox. My husband's toolbox was English literature. My father's toolbox was philosophy. And they used these tools, which be it Kant, or be it Milton, or be it Kierkegaard, or be it Shakespeare, as a way of teaching and illustrating religious values. And so I have integrated into my life that it's Torah. There's also Maddah, but not and Maddah, but also, maybe on the side. But I have not integrated in my life Torah and Maddah. And how it's affected me has been that, in a sense, a career of social work is not a career it's a career which comes from Torah values. And I see social work in its relating to, as someone once said, to all the people no one else really cares about. They're not the great people of the world. They are the people that have had problems realizing their potential. Sometimes the problems are because society does not allow them, because all men are not created equal. Some are born to single mothers in a poor society. They're born of the wrong color. They're born at the wrong time. And so I have seen this as a career of Gemilah Chesed, which is supported by Torah values. And I think particularly that's why I chose child welfare, because the future of the world and of Am Yisrael is in our children. And I have chosen that in order to be able to, in some small way, make the lot or the lives of children who have been born to opportunity that other children have been born to, for them to be able to get a start in life which would be better for them.
Wow.
It's Torah and Gemilah Chesed, and it could be Torah and literature, it could be Torah and science, it could be not and, but accompanied by. And so I take away the word and say Torah, v'gam Maddah, the Torah, v'gam Gemilah Chesed, Torah, v'gam you know, remember that famous look at that list.
Yeah.
That's what a Jew does. And in that list does not apply quantum mechanics.
Yes.
Quantum physics, excuse me.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for highlighting the primacy of Torah. It's really not Torah and anything, it's Torah. And all the other endeavors, the ands, are, as you said, a toolbox to be able to enhance the influence of Torah in the world.
Right.
And also your choice of social work, as you said, flows from the Torah value of chesed and making a difference in particularly children and people, others who are disadvantaged. That's really all flowing from the primacy of Torah and how it expresses itself in the different disciplines and endeavors in the world. Dr. Lichtenstein, thank you so much. We deeply appreciate your time and highlighting this fascinating perspective on this topic of assimilation and integration. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much. All right, so we're
happy Chanukah.
And to you, Chanukah Sameach. Chanukah Sameach. Thank you so much. Rabbanit Shani Taragin is a renowned Torah teacher in the English-speaking Jewish world. our educational director at World Mizrahi, and also one of the first, if not the first, Yoetzet Halacha, halachic advisor in integrating Torah knowledge with the challenges of family purity and the challenges of family life and intimacy. So my question for you, Rabbanit Shani Taragin, is how do we get the balance right? On the one hand, the timeless Torah values, which are beyond any particular generation and are always relevant. But how do we get the balance of the timeless Torah values right to the ever-changing modern world we find ourselves in? We live in a modern era with all types of new innovations, be they in terms of general studies, learning, in terms of technology, in terms of culture. It's very, very broad. And how do we ensure that we are loyal Torah Jews, loyal to our ancient traditions in every possible way, but at the same time, fully engaged in the world around us, embracing that which can be embraced from the world, to live as Jews in a most relevant, proactive way in the modern world we find ourselves? How do we get this balance right, in your opinion?
This is a very timely question, not only with regard to our postmodern world in which we're living, but definitely appropriate for Chanukah, because I think this is the 1,000-year-old question, if not more, with regard to how Hellenized should we be? How much should we be exposing ourselves to the culture, to the sciences, to the art around us? And we know that many of the Jews during the time of the Seleucid Greeks, in fact, did see common values, and there are numerous values. I think the barometer is recognizing the primary difference between secular or Greek Hellenized culture and Judaism. And that is that, albeit we do incorporate a lot of the modern world, technology, the arts, the humanities, but Greek culture was identified as a very anthropocentric culture. It placed man in the center, which meant that it's all about developing my identity, asking what's good for me. How can I be at the focus and truly the raison d'etre of my existence, whereas Judaism is a theocentric religion, namely that we put HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the center of our lives. And I think that always has to be the question, a very subjective question for each and every individual to ask, is this about me? Or is this about my relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Am I really pursuing this? Whether it be, again, my degrees, whether it be my exposure to the world around me, my integration with other people and other values, am I really doing this for the sake of God? And the test is going to be whether or not I'm able to maintain and truly focus on a God-centered religion, recognizing that sometimes, and more often than not, it really is not about ourselves. It's about that relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I think if we can allow that to serve as a litmus test, then this can help us gauge the modern world together with the Jewish values.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating how you've put that essentially the timeless Torah values, the Torah world is one which is theocentric. Hashem, God, is absolutely central in our lives, as opposed to many of the eras, certainly the modern and postmodern era, where it seems to be anthropocentric, very human-centered. And I think that's fascinating to get that balance right. So how do we do that in it seems very much the modern and certainly the postmodern world is a very individualistic centered world. It's so much about mimush atzmi, about personal actualization, and ultimately we navigate ourselves in the world to actualize ourselves and be fulfill ourselves in the best possible way that works for us. How does one integrate that in a modern and postmodern world, where it's really in so many ways all about that, as you said, the modern person, we are the center of our own worlds. How do we ensure that we're able to take that incredible sort of drive for self-actualization, but ensure that it's totally in sync with the God-centered world? How does one, that's the barometer you said. How do we do that? How do we do that?
So I think, again, if Chanukah is not just the holiday when we have to ask the questions, but Chanukah also implores of us to revisit chinuch. And this is really responsibility of educators, of parents, of leading figures in Jewish communities, where we allow and encourage self-expression. And our job is to help channel that, as you said, mimush atzmi, channel and encourage self-actualization. The way that you worship God, Rabbi Doron, is going to be different than the way that I do, different than my children, different than my neighbors. And each and every individual to try to seek out those talents, develop those talents, but as we said, make sure then that they're going to be channeled to Avodat Hashem. Again, whether it be, again, talents in science, talents in mathematics, talents in dance and art, and then as halacha, as employing and incorporating halacha as a basic framework for making sure that we see ourselves as abadim ta'akadosh baruch hu. How can I bring what Hashem has endowed me with, actualize that, and truly employ and incorporate that as a means even to the ends of Avodat Hashem, which can also be a tremendous Kiddush Hashem, using those talents and making sure that we attribute those talents to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, recognizing that these are kochot that Hashem gave us, la'asot chayil.
That's absolutely fascinating, both in terms of chinuch. As you said, it's about educating Chanukah chinuch towards finding that right balance. And of course, the prism of halacha, which allows us to engage, but at the same time ensure, halacha, that we're walking in the paths, we're engaging in the different paths the world offers us, but ensuring that how we engage and the paths we choose are totally in sync with Hashem and Torah. Perhaps on a personal level, I know that you are, one of the first, if not the first, your Etzet Halacha in Israel to graduate this new sort of a dimension of Torah learning, where women could engage in high-level learning of family purity in order to miya'etz, in order to bring a strong halachic female voice to guide women who deal with these issues. And how, if I may ask of you, with the many different hats that you wear and the many different roles that you play, but this was quite a groundbreaking one, and I think which also goes to the core of integrating deep Torah knowledge, halacha, with such a important, both personal as well as family-orientated mitzvah, of impacting a family, individual life, the life of husband and wife, the life of a family purity. How did you find that playing out in terms of this integration between Jewish law, halakha Torah, and the challenges of the time, through this prism?
So interesting that you should bring it up, because this really does touch a core and personal, I would say, sentiment and love that I have from the time that I was very young, in addition to loving learning Torah and being forever enthused with Torah learning and Torah insight. I also have a tremendous love for science, for biology. If you would have asked me, when I was young, what was I going to be when I would grow up, I think I would probably have said both a Torah teacher, but my parents can tell you a pediatric neurologist. I was going to study neurology and solve the problems of the brain and create surgery. And my father is a physician who definitely endowed and instilled us also with a love of both. My mother with her expertise in humanities, and it very much created a home to, as we said before, try to enhance those individual talents of each one of the children. And as I continue to grow up, this remains a passion. And I think the passions that we naturally have are those that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us, that we're supposed to develop. And I found that this program of Yoetzot Halacha, in addition to my love of studying and learning halacha, engaging within the developments of halacha, and it actually always bothered me that whether it's in seminary or even the advanced learning programs for women that started about 25 years ago, that focused on the development of Hilchot Shabbat and Hilchot Kashrut, no one really engaged in learning Hilchot Nidah, Hilchot Taharat HaMishpacha, on an in-depth level. And I remember when Rabbanit Hinken called me, I remember exactly where I was, and she said, okay, we're opening this program. And I was so excited. And I said, wow, even for the sake of the learning, of being able to incorporate and integrate so many aspects of, as you said, Jewish family life, this is going to be, again, just on a personal level, so wonderful. And it was even more, I would say, eye-opening, and now all the more important as I see the contributions that such programs are making within Am Yisrael. It wasn't just about the learning of halacha. As you said, it really is about studying so many different aspects, whether it's issues of intimacy, definitely anatomy, physiology, and learning again, about all different types of hormones, their effects. How does this play out with regard to every stage of a woman's life and every stage of taharat hamishpacha, the life cycle? And how does this also affect, as you mentioned, the shalom bayit? How does it affect the dynamics between husband and wife? And if you're thinking about it, it really is a perfect synthesis and incorporation of Torah, Maddah, again, psychology, and emotional aspects together with obviously the health and the briut. And I think that not only is this and not something new to Judaism, this is exactly what we're supposed to do. You look at halachic responsa for centuries old, and you find that always the medical terminology, the health of a person, both the mental health, the physiological health is always taken into account with regard to halacha. And therefore, the more that we can learn and incorporate this, the greater our Torah study, the greater our Torah scholarship, and most importantly, the greater the applications to Shmirat Halacha will be.
Well, that's also absolutely fascinating. This love of your love for Torah learning, of course, that we're familiar with. We're privileged to have you as our educational director at Mizrachi and so involved in so many Torah educational programs. But to hear also of your passion from a young woman for biology, the study of life, the study of, science, along with the humanities from your mom as well, and really having this sort of passion for the sciences and humanities and being able to engage and bridge in a harmonious way through a deep understanding of halacha in an area which engages, as you mentioned, so many elements of the human persona, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, is really fascinating. I think, as you've said, an unbelievable example of living this integration, of assimilating, so to speak, integrating Torah life and living with the challenges of the modern era. And perhaps I'll ask you a final question. There are a lot of these formula that have been developed where try and perhaps capture this desire for the correct integration, whether it be the term modern orthodoxy, where you're taking the Orthodox Torah values and trying to, hyphenate them with the hyphen into, with modernity, Torah U'Madah, Yeshiva University, Torah, and worldly knowledge and science, whether it be Torah Im Derech Eretz of Rav Hirsch, religious Zionism at Mizrachi, which has always been something we've been so invested in, to bring Torah and religious values into the national movement and arousing the nationalist fervor in order to bring Jews back to the land. Do these formulas speak to you? Is it something does this talk to, in your opinion, the desire to create this type of integration? How does these terms or any of these terms talk to you in terms of trying to get this balance right?
So each one of the descriptions that you just employed definitely strike a chord, whether it's religious Zionism or Derech Eretz or Madad, definitely do. But even as you were defining or attempting to define them, I think we all struggle, and you can imagine that the world at large struggles with qualifying exactly what these terms are. And therefore, I think we're safer at times to really dismiss some of these boxes, because not only do they really put us in a box, and I don't know about you, but I don't want to be identified as one versus another, which unfortunately many people do, trying to identify and polarize. And as you know, this only aggravates polarization within the Jewish community. But I think we also learned from Abraham Avinu, and the difference between an ideology and a theology. On one hand, I want to say religious Zionism. Isn't Zionism part of religion? And isn't Derech Eretz part of what it means to be a Jew? And isn't Maddah meant to be channeled within Judaism? And I think we do have to be careful, which brings us back to the first question of making sure that we don't get caught up with ideologies, but we see them really as theologies. That we ask ourselves at all times, is this consistent with our theology, with our understanding of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So back to the definitions. Of course, each one of these aspects resonates with how I see my personal level of Hashem, what I try to inspire in others, and obviously Chanoch l'na'ar al pi darko each person is going to espouse a slightly different aspect of theology. But even something like modern orthodoxy, I hope you don't mind if I just speak about that, because I think most of our listeners cannot probably identify in somehow, modern orthodoxy, but even that is interesting. Some people actually see modern orthodoxy the way that Rav Hirsch defines it, more as Torah and Derech Eretz. Others, Rabbi Lama, said, okay, modern orthodoxy is centrist orthodoxy, which is so relative. What's to your right and what's to your left? Rabbi Zatzal, who said, let's just get rid of that term already. And even Rav Soloveitchik, who really tried to, I'm going to say, propound modern orthodoxy from a very religious perspective. Again, so many people misunderstood. I always have my students, I say, okay, think of modern orthodoxy. If you have two circles, one right modernity and the other orthodoxy, how do you see in modern orthodoxy? And it's so interesting. Some actually portray it as two circles where they overlap. That small area where they overlap, that's my modern orthodoxy. But I have a whole life of modernity that is independent of orthodoxy. So that's orthodoxy. And what Rav Soloveitchik meant by modern orthodoxy is that Torah is at the center. My orthodoxy, my shmirat halacha u'mitzvot, that's at the center. And then there are so many different aspects, again, of modernity, whether, as you mentioned before, different aspects of, again, postmodernism, my spirituality, and my secular studies, my career, my sports, my interest in literature, and all of that. That's what Rav Soloveitchik was speaking about as modern orthodoxy. Let's draw that around my center of Torah. Let's direct everything, whether it's my study of the world, my study of literature. It's all going to be directed and channeled. Shakespeare should enhance my appreciation of Judaism. And yes, biology should be used and enhance my understanding and appreciation of Niflaot HaBorei in this world. And if one truly incorporates, and not only modernity to Torah, but the same idea, sees Zionism, really, it's part of my religion. That's exactly, it is religious. And therefore, I think that because of the confusions and improper associations, we're probably safer dismissing them and instead trying to focus on our theological goals.
Well, I think that's an incredible way of not only, finishing off this fascinating discussion, but also to tie everything you've said together so beautifully, which really made me think, on a personal level, that these axioms or these theorems or whatever they may be, this description of modern Orthodox, all these different things, whereas they have certain benefits in describing what the focus is in a particular era, ideologies are very much divisive and also fall short of really what life is all about. It's about theology. It's about a primary focus of our life on Hashem and everything to connect to it. And I think that's really a fascinating point. And you've clarified it really beautifully. And B'ezrat Hashem, we should all be zocheh, merit that however we come and try and live our lives of bringing the primacy of Torah and the values of Torah into our modern endeavors of its relevance to the modern world, it should always be through a theological focus, Hashem being the center of everything, and have theology and our relationship with God guiding everything that we do. Thank you so much, Rabbanit Shani Taragin. That was really fascinating. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rav Doron, and Chanukah Sameach to everyone.
Chanukah Sameach. Dr. David Pelkovitz is a professor of psychology, a full-time professor at Yeshiva University, both in the Azrieli School of Education, speaking in the spheres of education and psychology, and also in REITs, in the Rabbinic Training School, bringing pastoral, educational, psychological insights to the critical role of rabbinic leaders today. Dr. David Pelkovitz. So my question for you, Dr. Pelkovitz, and thank you so much for joining this symposium, is how do we get the balance right? How do we get the balance right between the timeless values of the Torah, which are never changing at their core, they're part of the eternal word of Hashem? How does it relate appropriately to the modern world, the ever-changing modern world? It's a modern world, it's a post-modern world, and every generation has its changing mores, and it's one is timeless, one is timeless, one is ancient, and and rooted in tradition, and another is modern, and as we said, ever changing. How do we get this balance right? What is the right formula for getting this balance and integration right between authentic Torah values and the modern world and its values and challenges?
Okay, so filtering it through the prism of psychology, which is all I know how to do, I would say that it's about clarity and consistency, and much more about conveying a sense of authenticity and integrity, of wholeness, to the extent that that, for example, in parenting, we best create a model that leads to internalization of values through what we get emotional about, what do we spend time on, what is it that we get excited about. Those are the core, I think, vehicles for transmission of consistency. When it's done in that kind of way, I think it does lead to the kind of integration that has the balance that I think we're aiming for here.
Mm-hmm. So if I understood correctly, you're saying once there's a sense of authenticity, once it's touching something, once conveying a sense of authenticity, a deep emotional connection, then through that prism, one can engage in the attempt to integrate our Torah values with our modern challenges. Have I said that correctly?
Yeah, and that's the way I understand it. It's the concept of a toho kuboro. The next generation, certainly, but also the people around us, can pick up on a lack of sincerity, and can pick up on a lack of integration, and lack of honesty. I think when we really have it kind of absorbed in a very deep way in our souls, that's when I think these kinds of questions are dealt with in a way that almost makes the challenge much less confusing, because if I could just stick with this a little bit longer.
Sure.
There's some fascinating research looking at what allowed righteous Gentiles to have to be such incredible exemplars of unbelievable moral courage and moral heroism. And some of the research on it shows that what it was all about was growing up in homes where there was a consistent message. How were errors handled? When somebody messed up as a child in the home, was it dealt with yelling, screaming, and criticism? Or was it dealt with kind of a calm explanation of, we know you're better than this. We expect more of you. When that happened, there was much more of a likelihood that when faced with these unbelievable kinds of moral dilemmas, they were able to basically go beyond what anybody could possibly have expected them to do. So I don't know. It's how do we handle our mistakes? How do we handle also? There's a concept of called in the field of neuroethics called ethical fading, which is fascinating. It shows almost everybody knows what the right thing is to do when faced with moral and ethical challenges that involve no self-interest. So we know what the right thing is to do. We know how to integrate. I think we have the moral knowledge. We have the ability, once we have clarity, to know how to handle these kind of competing forces. What the field of neuroethics, research done at Harvard, shows is that as soon as negias, as soon as self-interest is involved, a different part of the brain takes over. We're thinking in ways that are much more emotional, much less likely to show integration. And the answer to that would seem to be, at least according to the people who are trying to say, how do we give voice to our values so we get the kind of integration that we're talking about? And the answer, according to the people who specialize in this area, is you have to really work on it. You have to think about the challenges ahead of time. What are some of the challenges I'm going to face in the workplace? What are the kind of situations that I'm going to face that might lead me to somehow not be able to find the balance that we're talking about? And it's an art, but it's mostly about making it front and center in our minds as being the most important thing in our lives in terms of wanting to live this life, the balancing act. We have one foot on both sides of the fault line. We're living on that fault line. And it's an incredible challenge, but I find that if you think about it ahead of time, you find somebody who you really trust, who you can talk to about it ahead of time, be it a rabbi, be it a leader, be it a spouse, be it a friend, and get ready for those situations where we're going to have that competing pressure. And when you do it that way, the part of the brain that takes over is the part of the brain where men put on their tefillin every morning, the frontal prefrontal cortex, where our logical thinking lives, where our perspective taking lives, and where our ability to really find the balance lives.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So just to probe that particular point in terms of it's fascinating, the psychological insights, but how would you employ them if I now take these insights to the field of, to this discussion when we say, as Jews who are trying to be, authentic and, committed to the values transmitted at Sinai, to what we believe is, our traditions, our Masorah, living, the pure olive oil of the Chashmonaim, to make sure that our values are being lived the way that they should. And then trying to integrate that with the modern wisdom. We know that in the Chanukah story, how many, mityavnim there were, Jews who sort of at some point lost the I don't know about their personal authenticity, but sort of lost that balance between being faithful and loyal and committed to the traditions and values of the Torah, and sort of were in many ways indistinguishable from the Greeks around them. So, sometimes that desire to integrate ends up being some type of sort of acculturized, assimilated, where one's compromising those sort of authentic Torah values. In light of the psychological perspective that sort of you so beautifully described, how would you apply it to the religious spiritual integration and getting that balance right as I just described it?
Yeah, and there I think again it's all about focus. I'm often reminded of what leads to the pizur hanefesh, to the fragmentation of the soul, as as our rabbis tell us. What is it? Going over the millennia, right? It's Hashem yatzileni mi pizur hanefesh. Right? God save me from pizur hanefesh. Rabbi Bachya says, when we have focus and we keep our eyes on the ball, and what Rosh Ber Soloveitchik would say, that we have to live our life being ready to always answer the three core questions that Yaakov used in preparing his family and his army for the fateful encounter with Esav. Who are you? Where are you going? And what are you going to do with what you have? And I think that when we're able to maintain that focus and not get distracted by what social media does, by what the competing false values of outside society does, but to really keep reminding us of, what's the core? What are we all about? That takes empathy and focus and concentration in order to be able to really be there in a consistent kind of way.
Mm-hmm. And that's fascinating, this concept of yourself, Pizura Nefesh, where a person sort of loses focus. I didn't know about the beautiful Tefillah of Rabbi Bechaya, to be Hashem, to help us be focused and really Mechuvan Mataraz, we say in Hebrew, focused on the authentic mission at hand and not sort of getting distracted. And therefore, as you said, Mefuzar, sort of just, we lack that focus. That's a fascinating point. And perhaps
there's an additional related thought which has to do with our frenetic lives.
Mm-hmm.
We're pulled in so many different directions. Although COVID, Corona has made some changes in those areas,
mm-hmm.
but there's the beautiful thought I heard from Ramosha Tzvi Weinberg, quoting the Baal Shem Tov, who actually quoting the Piazesler, who quoted the Baal Shem Tov, who said that when we say multiple times every day the two words Yavadatem Mehera, one of the ways of thinking about it is get rid of the rush in your life. Because when we're rushed and when we're in a hurry, our empathy goes and the glue of our integration goes. So to the extent that we could find that still small voice in our hearts, I think we're going to be far better able to find the integration between the two opposing forces that we're discussing.
Well, that's actually it's totally fascinating for me to hear this psychological perspective on this particular topic, because you've mentioned the word a number of times, integration, authenticity, which comes from a place of being present, of calmness, of not vavadat meira, losing ourselves in the frenetic pace, which of course, as you've said, perhaps one of the silver linings of this pandemic that we still, the vaccines are starting now and we're hoping to, all come out of it, but not to lose what we've got from it. And that's just being a little bit more centered, a little bit more discerning between the ikar and the tafel, what's really important and what we can really do without. And also knowing exactly, as you've said, to come from a place of integrity, of wholeness, of calmness in a frenetic society really gives us the menuchat hanefesh, the ability perhaps to make more informed and balanced decisions about sort of getting this integration. Now, that's absolutely fascinating. And perhaps a final question on a personal note. I'm a great a Talmud of yours and your father's, not because I knew your father personally, but because of this poem that I've read that you both wrote on parenting. And I found it so fascinating to see, the late, great Rabbi Rafael Pelkovitz and his son, Professor Dr. David Pelkovitz, writing with these perspectives of a father and a son, of a rabbinic figure and a professor of psychology. And I know you've really tackled issues such as abuse and all types of issues which are not simple to tackle. And you've really brought a voice of so deeply embedded in the Torah world, in the rabbinic world. You quoted Rav Soloveitchik, in the rabbinic world also of your father's Weltanschauung. And perhaps if I could ask you, how does your background, your connection, with your father and your personal background inform the way you have engaged in this attempt for integration and authenticity?
Yeah, so it's such an important personal question for me. I often think that that if my father Zal had a bumper sticker, his bumper sticker was one of integration and consistency. He really modeled for us and for the community tremendous consistency, and he modeled integrity without lecturing. No lecturing. He modeled allowing us the ability to find our inner core. Each of my siblings were modeled in a very different way, allowing us to find our own uniqueness. You know, I'm reminded of the beautiful thoughts shared by Rabbi Pelkovitz as we get to Vayechi, the end of Bereshis, and he says on Ish Asher Kfi Birchaso Berachosa, right? There was a unique blessing for each child based on their uniqueness and their own unique kind of needs. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that always sticks with me is what Rabbi Rucham says is if when you bless your children in terms of your dreams and your hopes and aspirations for them, as you bench them, as you give them whatever blessing you give them, either literally or figuratively, as you dream about them, if it's about what you want for yourself, you know, I want you to be a doctor because I can never be a doctor. I want you to be a Torah scholar. I can never be a Torah scholar. I want you to be incredibly wealthy business person because I never made that. He says, if you do that, it's like taking a watering can and watering a plot of earth that has no seeds in it. He says it's literally a bracha levatal, an exercise in futility. The only way to really have an integration that we're talking about is you have to, basically, it has to match the unique abilities of that child. It has to be about them. It can't be about you. That's what I grew up with. That's what I grew up with. So that literally, he in the last minutes of his life, he turned to each of us and he gave us that kind of those kind of personal blessings. He turned to one of his grandchildren who marched to the beat of a different drum, but is an amazing, amazing guy. And he said to him, this is my son Ari. He held on to him. This is one of his last words on this earth. He says, Ari, just be Ari. Just be Ari. And it made such an unbelievable difference in terms of promoting the internalization. He did that with every one of us.
Wow.
And that, I think, that's the key to what we're talking about. Then you carry the values inside.
Wow. Well, it's again absolutely fascinating how the consistency and the integrity that you've spoken about is something that you so deeply imbibe from your father. There's a consistency from generation to generation, and integrating the Torah voice with the profound insights of psychology into helping us all navigate this balance between our frenetic modern society, which is the epitome of pizur nefesh. We've never been able to do so many things at the same time, and everything distracting us from being focused on one thing, and being able to take our essence, our Hashem and our Torah values, and try and integrate it into one whole, complete, authentic personality. Your insights have been really so insightful and fascinating. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Pelkovitz. We enormously appreciate it. And it's Chanukah Sameach you and your family.
Thank you so much for everything you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, what an exciting, inspiring, and insightful session the symposium was. And in conclusion, it gives me great privilege once again to thank our participants in the symposium for not only giving of their time, but giving of their insights, their wisdom, their perspectives in assisting all of us in facing the challenges of the day, the challenges that were faced then in the time of Chanukah, and our challenges today of ensuring the integration of authentic Torah Judaism with the challenges that we face in the modern era today. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed the session. Chanukah Sameach.